Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video, and today guys we're going to be asking and answering one simple question: are the Leagues of Votan utterly broken and overpowered? Now for those of you that don't know, the full Leagues of Votan codex has been leaked online and we've got to see them in all of their squattish glory, and I have to say it looks like a really strong codex. It seems to combine many of the best elements of other armies in 9th edition, so the fact that they get Armor of Contempt but it's a little bit better. It's like having Armor of Contempt and being a Salamander or an Iron Warrior. You can't reroll wounds or damage against them and you reduce the AP. They have that across the army, even on the bare-chested Berserker dudes. They all have that Void Sealed armor. I guess those guys have got Void Sealed pectoral muscles. I don't know. But they seem to have a lot of durability. You combine that with the fact that they have rail guns and Tau levels of technology, means that their shooting seems kind of out of this world. And not only that, they seem to have the auto-wounding ability of the Guard, but on steroids. So Guard get to auto-wound things on 6s pretty easily, but Votan can auto-wound things on 6s. If they use their Judgment tokens, they can do it on 5s and even 4s. So they seem, that's pretty strong. Any gun in your army auto-wounding anything of any toughness on a 4+. And you can hand those Grudge tokens out pretty easily. So they definitely seem very strong. They can regain more CP than anyone else thanks to psychic powers that specifically say you can get past the limit of 1 regen CP a turn, which is pretty crazy. On top of this, they have multiple regiment traits, customs, chapter tactics, whatever you want to call it, that not only give you a unique CP and a relic and a warlord trait and all that kind of good stuff, but seem to be made up of 3 parts. Every single one of them seems to have 3 parts, which is pretty crazy. There are a lot of faction traits out there that only give you 1 or even 2 buffs. Getting 3 universally is pretty mad, and the ones that you do get all seem quite powerful. There are a couple of standout ones. There's one that gives you a 5+ invulnerable save across your whole army. If you've got a 2+ save, it becomes a 4+ invulnerable save, and so which is better than counterparts in other armies. So for example, Black Templars have something which give you an army-wide 5+ invulnerable save, but you don't get any benefit for having a 2+ save. If you've got a 2+ save or a 3+ save or 4+ save, it doesn't matter, you just get the 5+ invulnerable save. So it's kind of like they seem to be getting lots of other factions' unique things, lots of other factions' sort of flavour, but then getting it better. So it's not like they've got one thing that defines them. They seem to have the best of all the different factions out there. So it's pretty crazy. I mean, someone was telling me, just sort of speaking about Black Templars, I believe Auspex Tactics did a video saying that the new squat champion can actually kill enemy characters better than the Black Templar Emperor's champion, who literally has one job, which is to seek out enemy characters and duel them to death. And actually, when you stack the Emperor's champion up against the new squat champion, he can't beat him, because the Emperor's champion whole thing is he gets rerolls to hit and to wound against enemy characters, but you can't reroll wounds against squats because of void hardened armor. So it just seems like they have all of the best bits of all these different factions. And speaking of their customs, their regiment traits again, you've got other ones that like just +1 toughness across the whole army. Suddenly you've got Landraider, I say equivalent. You've got Landraider betters that have toughness 9 now, and you can make them have a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save and all that kind of stuff. And then you've also got a faction that allows you to always count the enemy as +1 grudge token, which means if you put 1 grudge token on them rather than hitting them on 6s and also wounding, if you hit them on 5s, you auto wound. And so it means that straight away, very quickly, once you actually work out the mechanics in the army and how you can start spreading these grudge tokens out, very quickly you're putting multiple enemy units on a 4+ to auto wound from like turn 1. On top of this, you've got a custom that allows all of your OBSEC units to count as an extra dude when being on an objective. And on top of that, there's a warlord trait that lets you stack that. So you can actually have your basic troops as counting as 3 people on an objective. That means if you've got a squad of 20 of these Hearthkin, and bear in mind, I'd just like to point out, that GW has been trying to limit big squads for many of the factions, but these guys can take 20 men in their basic squads, which is kind of obnoxious to me. A lot of other armies have had their maximum units counts, sort of set to 10 or reduced down to 10 or fixed at a certain amount, but these guys, they can take 10 to 20, no problem, big units. So interesting how not only do they have a lot of elite choices, but they can hoard up very well. They can do the best of both worlds. because those troops that you're taking big 20-man blocks are actually some of the most well-pointed and pushed units in the Codex, in my opinion. Some people say they're fragile. I don't necessarily agree, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Because, as I was saying, these little blocks of men will be able to count as 3 per bloke, which means if you've got 20 of these guys on an objective, they can count as 60 men on that objective, 60 miles on that objective. That's just insane. And when you think about it, even if you take a minimum squad of 10, a unit of Space Marine intercessors, which is like the baseline of, you know, all units in Warhammer 40k. Everything gets compared to intercessors because they're just the middle of the road infantry at everything, right? A unit of 5 intercessors to take an objective off 10 of these Hearthkin warriors would need to kill all but one of them. Because if there's 5 intercessors versus 10 of these dwarves, and you only kill 8 of them, then those 2 remaining dwarves can count as 6 models, which means you still don't hold the objective, you still don't take the objective off them. So from all this that I'm saying, you might be like, well, obviously, Mordian Glory, they seem overpowered. Obviously, they seem broken. Obviously, they're going to be S tier. They're going to be the scourge of the meta. Everyone's going to be using Votan going forward. It's not going to be Warhammer 40k. It's going to be Votan 40k, because every single 40k player is going to have a Votan now. It's going to be mirror match after mirror match after mirror match. It would sound like that. And I think what's going to happen is that these guys are going to be A tier. I think they're going to be very powerful. And I think their overall place and their overall sort of position in the Warhammer 40k communities, they're going to be the scourge of lower and middle and sort of upper middle tables. I think that's where they're going to end up. However, I think they have a couple of really, really important key weaknesses. And I think these weaknesses may be significant enough that it will hold them back to the point of they won't be S tier. Now, I could be wrong, and we'll see when the Codex drops. We'll see how broken they are. We'll see if they start claiming tournaments left, right, and centre. We'll see. But these are the 2 reasons why I argue that they are very strong. They are very powerful, but I don't believe they are game-breakingly broken. The first one is their secondary objectives. For me, their secondary objectives are very, very weak. It's interesting. It's almost like they've been hoisted by their own petard, because they can hand out these grudge tokens like there's no tomorrow. And by the halfway through the game, every single enemy unit's going to have a grudge token or 2 on it, okay? But a couple of the Votan secondaries literally say, for every enemy unit that's got a grudge token on it, you lose a victory point at the end of the game for this. Okay. And it doesn't say that you get to max out the secondary and then keep going. You know, there's nothing that says you get 15 victory points, and then if you manage to score 20 victory points in the secondary, you actually get 20, and then you take the 5 off. Let's say there's 5 enemies with grudge tokens left on. No, you know how I understand secondaries to work, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, is you reach that secondary cap, you score max on it at the end of the game, and then at the end of the game, you start taking points off that 15 for the grudge tokens. So there's a couple of secondary objectives where they're like, they could max them, and it looks like they'll max them, but then at the end of the game, they could easily lose 4, 5, 6 points. So there's potentially balance in the fact that their secondaries are pretty weak. Okay, there is one good secondary in there that's specific to the Votan, and then after that, it seems like the rest of them are going to have to take the basic book ones. Now that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. But a lot of people these days tend to like to take their faction-specific ones, and it's generally held as as gospel that faction-specific ones tend to be better. There are exceptions to this. For example, Tyranids have absolute dogshit secondaries, yet they are top table at the moment because they're just so powerful. And I feel that might be similar to what happens with the Votan. I think they might have terrible secondaries, but their firepower is so good that they're able to win by just blasting their enemy off the table. And so I think that's what makes them fundamentally very, very, very strong. However, I do think they have one other key weakness. And bear in mind, guys, this is just my opinion. And please feel free to shout me down in the comment section. You guys know I have a thick skin and you can criticize me as much as you want. But I feel like they have a real weakness, which is going to be close combat. Now, they do have a number of stratagems that allow them to shoot into combat and all this kind of good stuff, or fall back and shoot and stuff like that. And they do have a couple of good combat units. They've got the Berserkers, which have Fight on Death, and everyone knows that Fight on Death is so obnoxious. And as previously mentioned, they do have that champion guy that can outfight the Emperor's champion. But apart from that, they don't seem to have a great combat presence. You've got the exoskeleton guys, which seem okay. You've got the other sort of Terminator equivalents, which seem alright. You know, they're not dedicated to close combat. They seem to have a little bit of both. And the basic Hearthkin warriors do have 2 attacks each. So they have, I'm not saying they're bad at combat, but they're not as combat-y as other factions out there. They're definitely a shooting faction with some combat potential. However, I can't help but think, and this is my gut instinct, guys, and of course Votan haven't even dropped officially yet, but I can't help but think that a unit of like Blood Angel Sanguinary Guard, or a unit of Blood Angel Death Company, or some sort of Chaos Space Marine Jump Pack unit is just going to tear through them. I can't help but think that if you're playing on a board, like a WTC style terrain board, where you're able to hop your jetpack units from one piece of cover to the next without exposing them, I can't help but think that if one of those kind of units, one of those true berserker style units, you know, World Eaters for example as well, one of those units that just puts out an ungodly amount of attacks and that is very, very fast, which is going to get the drop on them, I can't help but think that those kinds of armies are going to potentially be able to counter the Votan. Okay, now I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But as someone who collects a very shooting army and has been on the receiving end of many Blood Angel, all gas, no brakes attacks, alright, I can't help but feel instinctively on a gut level that Votan would struggle in the same way that Guard struggle against those kinds of armies, where they're just going to fly in and 20 Votan warriors are just going to disappear underneath an unending level of chainsword attacks. Okay, I just can't help but feel that's going to be the case. Now, I'm not saying they have no combat potential. Like those Berserkers, if you was to send a squad of Sanguinary Guard into those Berserkers, I think it would be equal odds on who's going to come out winning that fight. And actually, when you think about it, if the Sanguinary Guard get the drop on the leagues of Votan, then those Berserkers are still going to get to fight even when they die. So it's kind of like mutually assured destruction. So I think, you know, for the Votan to cover one of their key weaknesses, they're going to need to take those Berserkers. They almost need to use them as like a screening unit, which kind of sounds crazy. I don't know. But when you think about it, if you're facing a combat army, you're going to want your Berserkers up front, so when the combat blokes come in, even when they hurt you, they hurt themselves because of Fight on Death. However, I think against a shooting army, those Berserkers could be a little bit tricky because they're outside of, obviously, a transport, and they do have transport, don't get me wrong, but outside of a transport, they're fairly fragile. What, 6 up armor save, 5 plus feel no pain? Flurry of lasgun bolts, and it would be a flurry, guys. We'd probably start dropping them. So I think it's gonna be interesting to see how the Votan play out. But I would definitely argue that they're gonna drop and they're gonna be very powerful. I think we'll have to see what the top tier players do with them. And I think what I would say is it's going to be difficult for people to build a bad Votan list. I think you could build whatever you thought was cool out of the models. Like if you want to take if you're like me and I'm like, I want to take loads of those Hearthkin warriors, I want to take several of those big Hecaton land fortresses and the Sagittars, I want all of that stuff, I want a mechanized proper dwarven infantry style army, I think you could take that and do very well with it. Or if you're like, no, I want to go all gas, no brakes, it's Berserkers, it's exosuits, it's big Terminator blokes, we're going all in, all led by champions, we're going to nut the enemy, we're going to headbutt them, we're going to smash them, then I think you could do that. I think overall, I would say Votan are definitely powerful. I think it's going to be difficult to build a bad list with them, and I think that in the hands of a top player, we're going to start seeing some really wacky things being done with the faction, some really powerful stuff being done with them. But what do you guys think? Do you think they are plain old, overpowered, broken, just beyond redeemable? Or do you think they have a couple of weaknesses? I personally think they do have a couple of weaknesses. I think they might end up in a sort of underneath Tyranid kind of situation where they struggle on secondaries, they'll blast you off the board, but they might, if you get the drop on them and someone hasn't got necessarily the right things to deal with fast combat troops, I think that could be where their weakness comes in. But that's just my opinion, man, you know? So what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. But that's all we've got time for today. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, then please consider subscribing to the channel as well. If you really like today's content and you want to see more stuff like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. I just want to take a moment to say a thank you to our latest channel members and Patreons. So a massive thank you to Crispy, Gunner NWP, Apathetic 11B, Cap Bryce, Greg Shimon, B Keith, Mr. Derp, Jared Kirkland, Gizzy 376, Jacob Dale, Matt Wright, Anthony Pappuccino, Timmy the Elf, and Tyson Bailman. Thank you so much, guys, for becoming channel members. Thank you for doing your part. I also want to say a big thank you to the latest patrons as well. So Big 07 for Cadian4, Dominic Griffin, Frost Den, James Carroll, Zed Sylvia 51, Brian Jones, Kevin Morgan, Marshall, and Ven Diesel. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your support on Patreon. Now, before we go, I just want to say a massive heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters, to my War Masters. These are the people that have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty, and I'm eternally grateful to them. So a massive thank you to Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, Sly Varney, the one-man super chatting army. Massive thank you to all of you guys. You know how much I appreciate your support, but honestly, from the bottom of my heart, boys, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.